Hi, AT from CNC at Home. You know how I love to do experiments, so here's a new one. I'm going to try a tile, and here I have black powder coat paint. I'm going to try and spread it across here somehow with this little measuring spoon. See if I can get a somewhat even coat, and then try doing a material test to see what good parameters might be for doing this. I have seen other people do powder coat with lasers. How it works is the laser heats up the powder coat. It's a plastic, it melts, it adheres. Normally the powder coat is attached to the material through an electrical discharge. You basically create a difference in polarity between the powder and your material so that they attract each other. The powder then gets attracted to the material. Usually that's done with a metal material. There are techniques apparently for doing it with non-conductive materials. I'm just going to use plain old gravity, see if I can sprinkle some on here, do some testing, see how it turns out. That's what I'm going to do. There are likely other methods for doing this. I could do it similar to how I do the titanium dioxide and suspend this powder coat in something such as the denatured alcohol or water or something like that, and then spray it or brush it on. That might be a valid technique. I could even potentially put it in my airbrush, give that a try. Let's get the laser all squared up and get this burning. I'll probably need to focus it for this. I think the last thing I did was a cork backing on a tile. So we'll get this focused here as well. First we'll start by getting the laser homed. And because this powder is going to blow everywhere, I'm going to turn air assist off. And on this laser I do that by unplugging it. Let's get the laser moved then to where we want to do our burn. I'm going to use current position so it'll do it from wherever I tell it. Now I'm going to have to guess at what parameters I want to use. Is this going to be similar to the titanium dioxide? Is it going to be similar to burning through acrylic? I just don't know. So we'll take a look at some of these parameters and see if we can come up with a good range. Looks like we're going to have a wide range on our material test. So we'll do a nice big 10 by 10 and see what kind of parameters I can get that will work. We'll do a quick frame. Alright, my powder doesn't quite get all of that. So let's bring it down just a little bit. A little too much. Okay, we'll try that. See what it looks like. Okay, not perfect. It will do for what we need. Now to figure out my speeds and my power. I don't like going over 80%, so I'll put that as my upper limit. And maybe not start at 10%. We'll start at 20, assuming that we'll need some sort of heat here. Now it's not nice even numbers, but I think 20 to 80% power will be a good range. And then we can go from, what, about 1,000 millimeters per minute up to 4,000. Again, they're not even increments. That should be a good range for this. That's close at least. Wow, it's going to take 40 minutes to do this. I have no idea what my text parameters are going to need to be. So I'm going to do them slower. I'm going to do 2,000 at 80% power. That may or may not do the text. Plus, there's not good coverage on the bottom and top where we're going to be printing text. But let's give this a start. I'm going to turn on the exhaust fan This shouldn't be too toxic. I don't know. It should just melt this a little bit. It shouldn't be burning it, so there shouldn't really be anything given off. Just in case, we'll have the exhaust going. Okay, here we go. That process did give off quite a stink here. Let's get the gantry moved away so we can take a closer look. Okay, this isn't going to really show us a whole lot. It looks like something happened, at least in each one of the squares. I'm going to need to clean off any loose powder. Let me do that and I'll bring this back and we can take a look at it. I dumped off the extra powder and then I did a quick rinse. I got aggressive with my thumb, just scrubbing it. And for the most part, it all stayed on. This piece up here broke off. Otherwise, it looks like there are many spots here where the coverage is pretty good. Even at this low power of 20%, at maybe even 3,000 millimeters per minute, it's fairly consistent. Many of these, it really was starting to melt when I got into the higher powers. I'm going to assume that if I get a thin, consistent coat on here, it's going to do a much better job. All of these settings did something. It melted the powder coat and it adhered it. Going really slow with these high powers really looks messy, so we'll want to stay away from that. I like the idea of doing higher powers, lower power and faster speeds, so all the stuff in here looks pretty good. So maybe even a 4,000 at 40 to 50% power might be the ticket. I'll need to do another experiment. I'll do a suspension like we do with titanium dioxide, coat a tile, and see how that works. The powder coat material is definitely heavier than the titanium dioxide, as it did not want to maintain the suspension. It settled down very quickly. I poured in some denatured alcohol into a small amount of the powder coat, swirled it around, got it all nice and mixed up, tried painting it on. It was just way too thin. The next step was to try doing just dump on there. So I dumped it all on there and just kind of swished it around, tried to get as even of a coat as I could. These dark spots here and here were left over from trying to paint it on. It left a darker coat. Potentially I could put another coat of this on there. It seems like a cumbersome process. Not sure if that's worthwhile or not. I'm going to do another quick burn test just to see how this turns out with a much thinner amount or a smaller amount of the powder coat material on there. Have to get this cleaned up, see what it looks like. Here's what it looks like all cleaned up. Not too bad. The 5% power did pretty much nothing. 10% started to a little bit at the 4,000. We get into the 15 and 20%, we're starting to get really good burning going on here at a wide range of powers from 4 to 6,000 millimeters per minute. So this, I think, would be a good area if this was a process that I wanted to do. I did not like the coverage of the denatured alcohol, and it just wasn't a good suspension. So I need to find another way to get the powder on here. It did stick on there fairly well. I potentially could use the air assist with this method. What I'm going to do now is try and do some etching on this MDF. I'm going to use the material test in an odd way. I'm going to create some different depth pockets, and I'm going to not have it print any labels on it. I'm going to put some of the powder coat into the little squares that are created from this, level it off, and then do another material test. This time I will mark the settings so that I get an idea of what works better for actually melting this when it's down in some wood. In this case, it's MDF. So as you can see, it's not really doing anything here for the lettering. I turned the power of the laser down to 0.1%, so it's not even visible at that low level. Once it gets done with that and it starts actually doing the squares, then it'll be burning material away. Alright, so this isn't how I intended to do this. What I wanted to do was create a grid of constant depth squares and then come back and do my material test with the powder coat. What I did was I created variable depth squares. So I'm not quite sure how this is going to work. I'm going to do it anyway, but then I'll do another one. I'll just come over here and do one where each of these squares is consistent depth, and then try the powder coat there. I'll go get some powder coat, pour it in there, see how that goes. I'm going to do this with the air assist turned off because I'm sure that would just blow this stuff right out of there. Let's get this back to our spot. Even just the cooling fan was blowing that stuff around. We'll see how that works. Alright, let's see what this looks like up close. It looks like a bunch of the stuff has come out. I don't know if that's part of the melting process. It's really, this one is really deep still. This one is, yeah, they're all, it's like there's hardly any of the stuff in there. So none of those worked very well at all. I have etched in a 5x5 grid with the same power and speed settings. I've filled each of those squares with the black powder coat, and now I'm going to do a material test on this to see which one of the parameters works best. My understanding is going a little slower with higher temperature works well so that it gets the plastic to melt. So I'll get that set up and start the burn. This is going to burn starting at 500 millimeters per minute, so very slow for what I like to do, going up to 2,000 millimeters per minute. I'm going to use power from 40% up to 80%. Let's see how that turns out. Well, after a few experiments, it's still not looking all that good. The speeds down here at 500 millimeters per minute are actually kind of working the best. Up here, I think it's just obliterating that powder paint, as there's really not much left in there. The prior one kind of was the same way. So right in here, 500 at 50% power, maybe. Something to try. In some of the research that I'm doing or I've done, what I found that I liked really didn't use the laser to melt the powder coat. There was a channel where they were using a heat gun to do that, and that kind of makes more sense. All right, well, apparently I hadn't hit the record button. So what I did was I opened up my black powder coat and just took a little bit of it in this measuring spoon and I dumped it all around. Then I used this nice putty knife with a nice straight flat edge and just worked that back and forth to fill up everywhere that it burned and then scraped all the excess off. Apologies for that. The next step is to use this heat gun to see if I can heat up this powder coat towards its melting point, get it to settle in there nicely. There's powder coat on the surface that will melt. I'll just need to sand all of that off. We'll see how that turns out. This heat gun does have 2 settings, and I don't want to blow the powder coat around, so I'm going to use the lower of the 2 settings. Hopefully that will work well for us. I can see it starting to change in here. See any glint on there? I can see it in person. It almost looks like I should put more in there. I think I will. You'll be able to see this process again, I guess. I just sprinkle it on a little bit. It doesn't have to be exact because I'm going to basically screed it around with my putty knife. That's more than enough. Probably shouldn't have gone quite so close to the edge. It makes it a little difficult to get that area. Live and learn, I suppose. I'm going to dump this extra back into the bag. I'm not too worried about contaminating my mix, as I'm not going to be using this for real powder coating on metal, that sort of thing. Let's try a little more heat. Let it get warmed up again. If I was doing powder coat with an actual powder coat sprayer, I'd be wanting to wear a filtration mask because you don't want to be breathing this stuff in. The way that I'm using it, it's not getting in the air, so it's not that big of a deal. Probably is not going to look much different at this point. The next step will be to just sand this and get some of this surface stuff off and see what it looks like. Let me get the sandpaper. I'm going to start with something fairly aggressive. Get this down. This is a 60 grit. See how well this does. Before I raise too much dust here, I am going to put on a dust mask, but they are working. It's looking pretty good at this point. I'm going to go in with a finer sandpaper and finish this up a little bit. Might end up coming across this with like a tack cloth, maybe even a little bit of water, and rinse the stuff out of where the powder coat is. We'll finish off a little 220 Get this nice and smoothed out. See if we can get this cleaned up a little bit. I just used a little bit of compressed air, got that cleaned up, and this is looking pretty good. And where I sanded it, some of it's looking a little hazy. So what I'm thinking I might do is hit it again with the heat gun, see if that shines up a little bit. Let her warm up again. I suppose this time I could put it on high, since everything's pretty much already set in place. That looks like it turned out pretty well. The light glinting off there. That turned out pretty nice. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you like the content of our channel, think about subscribing, as that really does help us out. Enjoy doing your CNC at home projects.
Oops.
And have a happy new year.